I didn't print out my talk. It's on my laptop. It's just interesting, everything Paul was saying. We're just caught. We don't even think. I don't have my notes. I just bring up my screen. So here we are. Rod, thank you for those very kind words. And I didn't know much about Touchstone before the invitation, but it has been really wonderful already to see, to kind of feel an intellectual advance of Christianity, and to sense that we have people here that are thinking about the great problems that we're facing. I decided to kind of come here and give you some good news. I think there are actually some very powerful and beautiful things that are happening around us. I do have to start by, maybe giving you a little bit of the dark side of why we are here, and then hopefully then I'll show you, maybe help you see where the bright seeds are planted and where it is that we can pour some water to see what can grow out of this difficult time. And so, all right. And so I am an artist, mostly. I make liturgical art. I studied fine art in college. Now I am speaking a lot. We're also writing children's stories, but I am mostly an artist, you could say. And so I get my way of seeing through this vision of what we could call culture, making culture, influence, human influence on the world. And we know that for the past about 100 years, or probably more than that, the world of culture has been taken over by a vision that is a deconstructive vision. It's even longer than that. You could probably trace it all the way back to the Renaissance, where the notion of culture, or the notion of how it is that we influence and how it is that we recognize that which is valuable, is presented as disruption rather than continuity. And so we have this sense that novelty is the thing that is the most important, and we have these cycles of novelty where cultural agents will present themselves as a disruption upon that which came before, right? And so if you think of the artistic movements, it's very simple. Especially at the beginning of the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, it starts to accelerate quite a bit, where you have the Impressionists who see themselves as opposing and replacing the academic painters. And then you have a succession of these revolutions where the Cubists look back at the Impressionists and propose novelty on that. You have different versions of that. And then within a very short moment of time, it's actually just a few years, you basically have the template for what most people, start to believe that culture is, which is culture is the act of disruption, aesthetic disruption, social disruption, that proposes a type of energy that is, we have to be aware that it is a true energy. When you see something new, and when you see something that opposes, when you see something that turns things around, there is a kind of excitement that comes. But we have to see that this is why we are where we are. Accelerated cycles of these types of gestures have led ultimately to the postmodern deconstructed world and the kind of fragmented reality in which we are. Because as those speed up and as they become increasingly radical and increasingly weird, you end up with this idea that identity itself is revolutionary, which is the transhuman position. That is, that which makes identity valuable is the manner in which you self-identify, right? You say, this is me. And that's why, in the weirder stuff, all the stuff that's the weirdest thing, all the trans stuff, all the wild LGBT stuff, the furries, the madness of that kind of world is an expression of this basic pattern, which is the notion that identity is to be described as difference, right? That is, to be something is to be different from that. To To be the individual, you have to show how you are unique and you are different from others. Think of the rock and roll aesthetic, think of the punk rock aesthetic, think of all of these ideas, and then think of a lot of the children's movies, the Disney movies that you've seen. To be something is to be this bright, innovative moment that is a disruption and is different from the world in which you are. So you rebel against your parents, you rebel against society, you rebel against some type of moral order, and this is what culture is. Now, obviously, hopefully you can understand that if you're a Christian especially, that this is not sustainable. It is not sustainable. It is a lie. It cannot sustain itself forever. It's like a self-devouring monster, right? It's a monster that eats its origin, and then all of these iterations keep going. It's basically, it's Kronos castrating his father, right? It's a very, very old story. And it is also, as Paul said, it is Adam and Eve in the garden, reaching up and taking for themselves in order to elevate themselves in opposition to God. Now, everything we heard yesterday, obviously everything we heard today, were beautiful, powerful examples of how that has played itself out in the world, culturally, politically, technologically. All of this is absolutely true. But it's a lie. It's not true. That is not how the world works. And you can stretch the world, you can stretch things with sin to a certain distance, and at some point, the rubber band snaps back, right? You can do it in your life. You can lie in your life for a certain amount of time, but at some point, reality comes calling. And that is also true of culture, and it is also true of anything that you can imagine. Like, you cannot twist the world. The world has an actual order. It has an actual shape, and it will return. Now, the question is, how does it happen? And this is where really you have to be very attentive to notice how this thing happens. The phrase that my brother Mathieu, who wrote a book about biblical symbolism, he calls it the double inversion, calls it the double flip, something like that. And the best example to understand it is actually a clown, right? So the clown mocks, right? The clown opposes. The clown his existence is irony and subversion. But a good clown will ultimately, in the end, slip on his own banana and fall, right? It's very important. That's what makes a clown, right? So the king's clown, right? The king's gesture will make fun of the king, but ultimately the gesture also kind of has to make fun of himself in that role. And that's what makes this strange thing turn back on its feet. And so I coined this phrase a few years ago. I said, watch the fools. It was like around 2019, around 2020. When I started to notice that comedians and subversive figures were starting to, out of their own desire for subversion, were starting to embrace traditional ideas, right? Because it's like the last rebellion. What do you do when, you have a tradition of rebellion, which is what we've had for 100 years? The paintings that you see now in a gallery, or if you go to the Chicago Art Institute and you go visit the contemporary section, it's basically what was being done in 1920. Right? Nothing has changed. Rebellion is not complicated. It's really, and we think rebellion is very sophisticated. Rebellion is not sophisticated. Rebellion is just, here's a rule, here's a pattern, and I'm going to do something that doesn't fit. And that's all it is. That's what the hippies were. That's what, you just see what the rule is, and then you do something that's outside, that you just color outside the lines, okay? And there's room for that. It's not like I told you about the king's gesture. There are roles in society for that type of behavior, but it cannot become the system, right? You can't have a tradition of rebellion. You can't have your entire cultural enterprise based on rebellion. It's just not possible. It leads to the kind of chaos and fragmentation that we're in. And so if you pay attention, you will notice in this upside down world, you'll start to notice places where normality is reinserting itself, and it's always going to be deeply ironic at the beginning. I'm going to give you a few examples just so that you know what it is I'm talking about. So in 2021, some TikToker, I don't know who it was, who was tired of being told that he was transphobic for not being attracted to trans females, coined the term, you know it, super straight? You know that term? So he said, oh, I am part of LGBT culture. Like, I'm literally part of your LGBT culture. I just happen to be super straight, which means my sexual identity and expression is that I am a cisgender person who is only attracted to cisgender people of the opposite sex. Right? Now, if you go now on the GLAAD website today, you'll see that that is hate. Right? Super straight is hate. Right? But it's important to see what did you see what happened there? Right? Inside the chaos and inside the rebellion and inside the fragmentation, someone is able to distinguish the seed from the earth, is able to see the difference between the pearl and the field, is able to say, oh, this is the shining bit, this is the sparkling bit. If I can just point to that, it's going to change everything. Right? Another example, online example, is the trad wife. You know about the trad wife? Well, you have to understand that the trad wife meme, which is women online on like the social media that are influencers, really in the worst kind of way, but they make videos of themselves, you know, wearing very decent clothing and, you know, holding babies, and they do all this stuff. And you think, oh, it's silly, it's ridiculous. It's actually, in some ways, what Paul is saying. It's like you're feeding the machine by doing that. You're basically being subverted into the system. And there's a way in which that is true. But the thing is that there are some patterns that are truer than others, right? There are some patterns that actually, if you're a Christian, you know that there are some things that are true. And if you point to them, if you pull them out, then they will have huge amounts of, let's say, they will restart the world. They will be what we could call a tool of resurrection, is a good way of thinking about it, okay? And a lot of the stories, beautiful stories that we were told last night, they talk about this. This is some of the stories in the Bible, they actually talk about this. This image of the fish and the gold coin in the fish. Even the very idea of fishing, and this idea that, because you have to understand biblical cosmology, right? So down below in these waters is the chaos, right? It's the thing, it's the chaos. It's this image of when the world falls apart, what happens? The flood, right? When everything falls apart, the flood comes back, and then you return to this primordial chaos, right? And you can feel it, right, in the fragmentation. You can feel it in the fact that people don't know their neighbors in our suburbs. People don't know each other. That there's political factions that look like it's impossible that they will heal themselves. But Christ in that story says that hidden in that stuff, there are some bright, shiny bits. There are some things that are sparkling. And if you want to know what the future world is, you better pay attention. And you'll be able to see where those sparkling things are happening. So yesterday we heard about the miracle of the walking on the waters, right? And I would like to tell you that it's happening now. Like Christ is walking on the waters right in front of us. And we should not let him pass by. There are transformations in culture that are happening, that are showing us that there is a return to what we can call verticality. And this is happening in all the different fields simultaneously, where reductionism, materialism is over. It no longer yields sufficiently. And so you have very prominent thinkers, scientists, all kinds, that are experimenting with notions of superior agency, that are experimenting with ideas of intelligences that are acting on us. And this is happening all over right now. And this is why, Rod's book is a great example. There are several books that now are like coming out. Rod has been wanting to publish his book. He's been like a prophet before his time. He's been wanting to publish a book for like 5 years. He's been trying to publish this book. So finally he gets it published, and then there's like a flood of re-enchantment books that happen at the same time, because he could see it right from before, that in fact, everybody is yearning and is looking for ways to unite. And it's happening politically too, right? So many people, young people, are realizing that the liberal order, like the classical liberal idea, is not enough, right? That the rights of the individual, that the strength of the individual isn't enough. Because now we're seeing that we're falling apart. Why are we together? What makes us a nation? What makes us a family? What makes us anything except for just fragmented individuals in the suburbs that have no town centers, that have no common places, that just exist, like these broken little bits. And it's scary, right? It's very frightening right now. It's a dangerous, crazy time, because everybody is grasping. What are these vertical relationships? How do we connect to that which binds us? How do we do it socially? How do we do it as people? And it's coming out in all these wild ways, which is interest in fascism. Yeah. But also weird religious, like UFO obsessions. And also, the same thing within the kind of LGBT thing. It's like trying to provide a solution to that problem. They're saying, and it doesn't work. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. They're saying, we know we need something to unify us. If we could only make difference unify us, like it would work. We could just keep pushing. Like diversity, if we could just have diversity, then it would work. But obviously that's ridiculous. Diversity without unity is decomposition, right? That's what decomposition actually is. And so, but it's the desire. You have to be able to recognize the desire that people have is a legitimate desire. And the desire of these little extremists that are appearing around us, all of those are legitimate desires. And so we have right now one of the greatest opportunities, which is you have a whole generation of young people that are hungry. They are hungry for meaning. They're hungry for connection. They're hungry for some kind of vertical relationship. Right? And as Paul said this morning, it just happens that we have the best story. That we actually have the best story. We have an image which is not of the machine as this top-down thing with cogs all doing their parts. We have a body with a head that unites the body together so that it's well-fitted in love. That's the best story. Right? So what do we do now? Right? What can we do? And I want to separate this into basically 3 ideas. And it's remember, celebrate, and create. And we need those 3 to be together. We need to first remember. One of the things that's happened in the past decades is that Christians have been on the defense, constantly on the defense, constantly trying to justify their story against attacks and against all of this stuff. And we've kind of been beaten down, and we're kind of ashamed, and we don't quite know how to answer. And the truth is that we have now seen the fruits of the world they proposed to us. Right? So 100 years ago, it would have been harder. It was harder to resist. It was harder to propose because their world they wanted didn't exist yet. And so they were saying, if you just get rid of this superstitious nonsense and all of this hogwash, and you just follow these things, we will reach utopia. We will have the best world. Well, now they got it. They've had it. They've had their chance, and it sucks. Right? And it is not good. And so we have to remember, and now we have to recapture our confidence, not in ourselves, obviously, our confidence in Christ, our confidence in knowing that Christ is not just the guy that you believe in to go to heaven, that Christ is the exemplar of the best pattern of how to exist that has ever been manifested in the world. Right? And like I said, if you're bold and if you know that that's true, people will come. They will be attracted because it's true. Right? Because it's true. And now, like I said, you can lie for a while. And lies are convincing, and propaganda is convincing, and a lot of us are under the weight of propaganda, but that will run out. It has to run out. And in the moment when it runs out, you have people that are hungry. And that's the situation we have now. In the Bible, memory is explicitly used to describe the moment of the shift that I'm telling you about. The moment when the world has fallen apart, has broken down into absolute chaos. And in that dark moment, there's a little switch that goes on. And that switch is represented as remember. Right? I'll give you two examples. There are many others. I'll give you two of the biggest ones. What happens? Noah, the whole world falls apart. Noah is on the waters. Everything is over. What does it say after the rain stops? It says, God remembered Noah. Right? What happens when Jonah goes down into Sheol all the way to the bottom in the belly of the fish? He says, I remember your holy place. From the depth of Hades, from the depth of Sheol, I remember your holy place. And so that is what we need to be able to do, is to remember. And in remembering, it will mean that we have to cast off so much of the nonsense that the reductionists have laid upon us as Christians. We have to be able to recover and remember the best versions of what Christianity is, the highest version of what it is. And it's powerful because yesterday I was really happy to hear that here at Touchstone, you were able to realize that Christianity is not just a kind of moral situation about, our relation, how we're going to die or where we're going to go, that it is actually an ontological structure. It is a way to understand the world, and it's a way to exist in the world, and it is the best one. And if we can recapture that, then we become the ark, right? We're transformed from the dead Noah in the belly to the prophet, to the pearl that is hidden in the seed. So, what does it practically mean to remember? I see it in three ways. It's to, first of all, change the way we think about what culture and human existence is. To stop thinking that it is about disruption. Because as Christians, we also tend to think that it's just, we grew up in this world, we lived in this world. We tend to think that innovation is a good in itself. We tend to think that things are constantly have to change, that things have to adapt to the world. Right? We have to all of that is baked into this idea that in fact it's the change which is valuable, right? And not the source. It doesn't mean things don't have to change. Things have to change, right? But if you change as you remember, You can change because you remember. Do you know what I mean when I say that? Right? If you're going to the store and you know why you're going to the store and you have a plan of where you're going, and then a road is closed off because of construction, then you will change because you remember. You're not going to change to adapt the goal or to adapt to change what it is you're doing. You're going to change in order to remember. And that is very different in terms of what the source of our... And we also have to be able to rethink of ourselves as continuity. We have to be able to think of humans as people that come from somewhere, people that are continuous with our ancestors, continuous with the stories, obviously identifying with the best of it, and not embrace this aesthetic of constant disruption. So we have no excuses anymore. You have to know your church history, really. You have to know the Bible. You have to know the great thinkers of our Christian faith. You have to learn to know what is it that Christianity has produced, the beauty that it has made in its music, in its architecture, in its art, all of that. In this moment when everything's falling apart and we're pornified and we're gamified, those images, they're a moment of memory. They can be a moment of memory for us, but also for others too, even for people who aren't Christian. How many people, I come from an Orthodox tradition, but I know there's so many people that walk into a traditional church and are struck down by beauty. Right? They're struck down by beauty. Beauty for us is now a weapon in a world that is the ugliest that it's ever been. People don't even know. They don't even know. People, they go on to Europe and they'll travel thousands of miles to go see beautiful things. All right, let's do it. Let's make beautiful things, But we also have to remember the stories. One of the things we're doing now is we're telling fairy tales, as some of you might have seen. And the reason is because, again, these stories that have been handed down to us, that are images of continuity, they contain in them something of who we are. Even if you don't totally understand it, it's okay. They contain something of what it is that for 1,000 years, people have cared about. For century over century, what people have attended to, what people have thought was important, and they transmit these stories through generations in a manner that it's almost like an automatic process. The very fact that some of these stories are with us, that have been with us for thousands of years or hundreds of years, means that they have in them a little bit of a seed of what it is that continuity looks like, right? Because they are images of continuity. Fairy tales are a good example. Fairy tales are images of continuity because there are stories that are passed down generation to generation. And so we have to kind of think of it that way. Deacon Seraphim Rowland, who's coming up next, he will tell you about this. And hopefully pay attention. He will give you some keys to how it is that we can do that with the way we think of history, the way we think of our place in the world. So the next thing we need to do is celebrate. Culture, for almost every civilization, every tribe, every place in the world, culture is celebration. It is not ironic. It is not just for innovation. And it is not entertainment. All of these are parasites on what true culture is. True culture is celebration and participation. Right? And so if you put up a public monument in your town to remember something that is related to an important moment, an important origin, that is true culture. Your national anthem, that is true culture. The songs, and obviously, you can imagine where I'm leading this to. all of this has to be downstream from worship, because that is the true art. The true art and the true culture is worship. It's the beginning of culture. It's the beginning of everything that, how can I say that? It's the beginning of every human activity is worship. And that's why worship looks the way it does. That's why worship is singing. That's why worship is us binding together, uttering the same words together, singing the same songs together, because it is celebratory. And that is something that we really kind of have to shift in our mind. Now, does it mean that we won't sometimes be entertained? No, that's fine, right? And actually, even this idea that some art or some culture is disruptive, that is totally normal. That has been part of the world forever. There are gargoyles on cathedrals, right? And in medieval manuscripts, there's all these little monsters on the edge. And so disruption and questioning and like novelty and surprise, it's not that it's not part of culture, but it's not in the middle. It's not in the center. You don't put a gargoyle on the altar, right? You just keep it in the corners where it's kind of funny if I'm distracted, you know. And that is the difference. So the first place where the cultural transformation has to happen is in liturgy. It is in liturgical art. I think liturgical art is the future of art. It's the future of art in America. And there are inklings of this. Some amazing artists. There are some, what I believe to be some of the greatest artists living, that are painting images for churches right now. You can look him up. Father Silouan Justiniano. He's an American monk, wonderful guy, studied contemporary art, mastered, color field painting and modern color theory, then ultimately became a monk, broke, and started to paint icons in ways that are deeply full of memory, right? But also sophisticated and powerful. And this is happening all over the world, right? It's happening in England. There's an artist, Aidan Hart, who is legitimately, one of the greatest artists alive. It's happening, obviously, in Romania. It's happening in Russia. It's happening in many countries where the liturgical art is actually the future. Architecture, city planning. These are some of the most important things. We forget about it. We don't think about architecture and city planning. But these are the basis of what it is that humans recognize as being inside and outside, what we recognize as being above and below. These are all preset. The reason why architecture and city planning are some of the most important arts is because they recede in the background. People live in them. Many people aren't even conscious of them. And for that reason, people aren't conscious of the anxieties that modern city planning and modern architecture does to us, the anxiety that it lays on us. And we don't realize that actually walking through a series of glass skyscrapers is actually an experience of dread, a little bit of dread in that experience. And we're so used to it because there's awe in that dread, obviously. But it's not the type of awe that would make you feel at home, for sure. Okay. And so there are right now movements, and all of you can look into it. There are powerful movements of new urbanism, new city planning, new architects. There are some little inklings, little things that are happening. If you know, I don't want to get into politics, but one of Trump's executive order is to force all federal buildings to be designed classically, right? So if that works out, right, it's already a little hint. What it is, it's like a glimmer. It's showing you that something's changing. For that to reach the top of the pyramid means that there's strength and there are things moving down here. So I would say that if you're building churches, if you're building houses, if you have to decide where to live, to take that into consideration, that this is something that you can do very practically. And then obviously understand story as participation. We have, for a while now, we have this weird idea about literature. Literature is great, but we have this idea that we should read great books, to be smart and to kind of know what culture is. There's nothing wrong with that. But that is definitely not the heart of culture. Right? The heart of culture are the stories that you live in, are the stories that are part of you. So that's why the fairy tales, right? If you're going to read the Iliad, if you're going to read the Odyssey, if you're going to read some of these ancient stories, do it understanding that these are your stories, that these are the stories that brought us where we are. If you're going to read the Bible, realize that this Bible is the story that I am in. I am in that story. This is not like something that I'm looking at from the outside. But that's true for a lot of other things. It's true for your own family stories. It's true for your national story. And that's why there's a great desire to subvert the myth of the national story, because people know that change the story, change the world, right? If you change the story, you change the world. So as Christians, we can be definitely attentive to that and change the way we understand story. Memorize stories. If you have kids, memorize fairy tales and tell them orally. Don't just read them. Tell them orally. Do the same with Bible stories. Tell the Bible stories to your kids orally too. Read them from the Bible, yes, but internalize the stories because they're your stories. They track what is important to you, okay? So the next thing I would like to encourage people to do is to create. You know, we've also been in a situation for 100 years where Christian artists have been on the outs, right? We have been on the outs both in terms of social relevance, but we have also been on the outs in terms of quality. So we have to be fair to ourselves. And one of the reasons why Christian art is irrelevant is because it stinks, because it's not good. And the reason why it's not good is because of the two things that I said at the outset. The reason why it's not good is because most of the Christian artists have embraced the nonsense of innovation. They have embraced the idea that art is self-expression. Art is not self-expression. That's ridiculous. Right? What an artist should want to express is something that is far beyond their self. That is what the artist should want to express. That is true art, and that is the art that is transformative. So we have to change, we have to metanoia. We have to stop thinking that way and encourage. If you have children, if you have people that you know that are creative in temperament, put the pressure on that they remember and they celebrate. Christians have made some of the most beautiful things in the existence of the world. Christians have made monuments to the glory of God. Christians have written music to the glory of God that is beyond anything that anybody has produced. But we don't remember because we think it's all old fogey stuff. It's like, no, we need to be with the times. Well, the times right now, everything's breaking apart. So we're going to have mumble rap in church? Is that the next thing? Right? Like how far do we go with this, right? How ridiculous do we become before we realize that we have in our memory, we have all we need for true restoration. Artists have no excuse not to know anymore, right? And as Christians, if you run institutions, if you run schools, if you're a teacher, you have to train yourself. And you know, you think that we don't do that. Like, we have your kids look at images that Christians have produced. Right? Take them to find the most beautiful church in your city, and take the kids there. Right? Even if it's not your own denomination or whatever, just so they can see what it is that Christians can make that is beauty to the glory of God. And this is one of our greatest weapons, because like I said, everybody's hungry. Everybody's hungry for it. And be bold, right? Because this is hard for maybe some of you to believe, but this is the future. This is the only future. There's no other possible future except for the one that I'm telling you about. If you are a Christian, you have to know that this is the only way that it can go. Anything valuable that will come downstream, that will come down the line from this moment on, will have to be to the glory of God. And look at what's happening, you know. It's like Paul you have to plug your ears in, Mr. Kingsnorth. You have one of the greatest living writers in the English language that came here to tell you that he wants the world to be submitted to Christ. And he's not the only one. There are weird and wonderful conversion stories that are popping up if you're paying attention. You know, Ayaan Hirsi Ali has converted. And there are other people in that field. Martin Shaw, who Rod has talked about in his book, is literally one of the greatest living storytellers. Bar none. Not the one of the best living Christian storytellers. No. One of the best storytellers in the world. And that's what's possible. That is really what's possible. Right? And pay attention. Hollywood is collapsing. You noticed, I hope. Right? Yeah. But in that void, watch what's happening. Be attentive. There will be voices that will appear in the chaos, that will be voices worth attending to and voices worth encouraging. So be attentive, right? And be ruthless. Don't expect nothing less than the best, the very best. We have Bach. We have Chartres. That's ours, right? Come on. We have the best stuff, you know? And so I think that we really have to, and like I said, notice some examples. I'll give you one example, not to pick on Paul too much, but there's a book called Loris, right? Published by Eugene Vodalaskin. Many people probably know that. That is one of the greatest novels that has been written in the past few decades. A Christian man writing a novel about Christianity with all the subtlety and all of the complexity of modern, let's say modern literature, but looking back and remembering and celebrating in the book in ways that are harsh, that are hard, right? Dostoevsky style, not saccharine, not just all of this fluffy stuff, but really going down into the core. And that, like I said, we have the best stories. Read the Psalms, right? You think Christians don't know about suffering? You think Christians don't know about complaining and yearning and desiring to see salvation? We have all, the Bible has all the best stories. And so notice and pay attention. And the next thing, for those that are creative too, I would say, also don't be afraid to pillage the Egyptians. Right? Right. And so it's not just about knowing what Christians have done. It's not just about knowing what Christians have written or have painted or have done. But if you want to be creative, if you want to move into that circle, look at what your enemies are doing and pillage the Egyptian. Take anything that's valuable in order to serve God. And so I want to conclude and say, one of the things we're doing, I'll give you an example of what in the vision that I'm proposing to you, is we want to retell the fairy tales. And it's related to a moment right now. Like I said, Disney doesn't want the fairy tales anymore. They actually hate them. They actually despise those stories. And so they're dropping them. Right? But those stories, right, they're the pearls. They're the shiny things. And so in a moment when people are dropping them, now's the moment to pick them up. Right? And to say, let's tell those stories again in a spirit of memory and celebration and no compromise. Make them as beautiful as possible. And so that's the direction that a lot of my creativity is going into. But I think, like I said, in this particular moment, that's why my talk is called This is the Day. In this particular moment right now, it is particularly available for Christians to do that because of the hunger and because everybody else is dropping the ball. And all the stories are horrible. Who even wants to watch Netflix anymore? It's just, it's not even like, at least there were moments when there were things that were perverse, but they were at least well written. Things have gone so far now that they're perverse and they're boring. How did that happen? Because you think perversion is a pretty easy way to get people's attention, but it's like to make perverted things boring. That's how much everything's falling apart. Right? And so find the pearl, find the stories. Remember God especially, but remember. And so thank you.